after I give the 3, 2, 1, then go ahead and start talking. Okay. So here we go. We're going to begin in 3, 2, 1. All right, we're going to go live.
Welcome to everyone joining us today. We're very happy to have you. Before we begin, we're going to turn it over to Dr. John Duke Anthony, founder and president of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, who will offer some introductory remarks. Professor Anthony, would you like to take it over?
Thank you, Josh. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. We're pleased as can be and honored and privileged to be part of this program. We know we're pioneering. We're breaking new pathways for the coming generation of Arab youth athletes and sports participants. We're pleased to be co-sponsoring this program with the King Faisal Foundation for Islamic Studies and Research. The foundation is long-time chaired by His Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, who has been a friend and a participant and a supporter of what we seek to achieve in our educational mission at the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations. Prince Turki's been a speaker for 11 different times, keynoting our annual Arab-U.S. Policymakers Conferences. And we're pleased again and privileged and honored to be asked to be part of this pioneering session. Josh Yaffe will be the moderator and the glue, the adhesive, the common thread, keeping us all together as we proceed on the substantive and procedural dynamics of this program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Anthony. We very much appreciate that. Now, before we begin, I want to be able to thank a couple individuals, Abdullah Khawaiter at the King Faisal Center and Mark Morozink at the National Council. These two gentlemen were crucial in putting this together and making sure that everything ran appropriately, and they deserve a lot of credit for success. Now, the topic of sports diplomacy in the Middle East might seem rather straightforward, but I think it bears explaining exactly how we arrived at this panel discussion, because the origin of this event says a lot about why we're here today. This was originally planned as a conference that was scheduled to take place before the coronavirus, with a lineup of speakers representing non-governmental organizations, many of whom you'll see on the lineup today. The idea was focused on working within civil society to promote teamwork, fitness, fair play among youth in the region. And we brought in the State Department on board because with everyone we talked to, everybody seemed to point back to the Office of Sports Diplomacy as a key provider of assistance and contacts. And as this concept grew, we realized this conference wasn't about civil society or government per se. It had nothing to do with promoting a particular policy or improving anyone's media image. Rather, we looked at our proposed speakers, each of whom has dedicated many years and decades of their lives to sports, and we felt that was the point. What these speakers had in common was not any desire to launder their reputation, but rather their active engagement in activities that push the boundaries of sport and challenge the norms of the societies they live or work in. To accuse them of using sports for the purposes of image peddling would be a disservice to the hard work and dedication that each of these individuals put in through long years of devotion to their missions. Of course, when the pandemic hit, we were unable to convene the conference here in Washington, D.C. as planned, but talking to the King Faisal Center, their Secretary General, Dr. Saud Al-Sarhan, suggested we could run it live on the internet as a collaborative effort. And I told him that could work, but only at the condition that any additional participants would have to be similarly devoted to this mission of civic engagement through sports. And in keeping with the theme of this event, we could allow speakers who have a legitimate commitment to using sports as a tool for education, for conflict resolution, or for community building. And with the additional speakers that the King Faisal Center brought to bear, I feel we have that together we've achieved that goal. Each of these speakers, both our Saudi participants, our American participants, and others, they each have a very personal connection to the work they do and a purpose for being here today that ties in directly to the mission that they're trying to accomplish. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Prince Faisal bin Bandar bin Sultan. Prince Faisal is the head of the Saudi Federation for Electronic and Intellectual Sports, and he's been in that role since 2017. It has a mission of supporting all aspects of the gaming process and making Saudi Arabia a global gaming hub. In 2012, he founded Soccer Al Jazeera, a company devoted to recycling and the environment. And what I'd like to do before I turn it over to him is ask him, Prince Faisal, it seems that now we're facing a situation with the coronavirus pandemic in which traditional contact sports based in stadiums and arenas can't function to the extent that they did in the past. And that makes your work at the Federation particularly interesting. Could you perhaps tell us a bit about what your work involves and where you see things going?
Absolutely. First of all, I'd like to thank the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations for organizing this seminar. The work that you do to bridge the gap between communities and cultures is essential to improving understanding between nations and peoples alike. And I'd also like to thank the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies for their support in organizing this seminar. And I'm grateful for their work in generating and transmitting knowledge between the kingdom and the rest of the world. Now, I'd like to take a step back for 1 second. And when we talk about sports diplomacy, this to me has always been an interesting topic because sport has an amazing power to inspire and unite people, and that no other avenue has. You know, through sports, all polarizing issues can fade away, and it leaves us with the enjoyment of the activity itself, the celebration of the skills and performances on display that can be appreciated across the board. From the Olympics to the World Cup and everything in between, we see nations of the world come together to celebrate something magnificent. Now, as you mentioned, as president of the Saudi Esports Federation, I'd first like to explain for 1 second why we as esports are part of this pantheon of sports. People think, you know, we're trying to move away from the old paradigm of esports, you know, and gaming as people in a basement, you know, with TVs. You know, you talk about social distancing. That was the initial social distancing. But that whole thing has changed. The gaming community and the esports community is active. They participate, and there was a study done in Germany studying esports players for 5 years, and they found that the heart rates of esports players during tournaments can reach between 160 to 180, which is equivalent to, you know, a marathon runner. Their cortisol levels in their blood, the stress levels, reach the equivalent of F1 drivers. So if these are the stresses, and that's not to say anything about the mental stresses of competing in front of thousands of people as in any other traditional sport. So if these are the stresses on one's body, then our esports professionals have to first look at themselves as professional athletes, and then they have to be treated as professional athletes as when it comes to fitness, mental health, physical health, social health, and all of these aspects. And one of the things that I truly love about esports is that it really is an all-inclusive sport. It is the ultimate equalizer. In gaming and esports, skill is your only differentiator, your skill in the game. And, you know, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, how fast or slow, all that matters is what you can do within the game. And it brings people together in a way that is different. I'm not saying better or worse, but so much different than anything else, because your first interaction with someone is through their skill level, not their race or gender or religion or anything else. So your first impression of someone is their skill level. And it allows people to thrive more instantly, in my opinion. And because of that, it has such a global reach, and it now competes with, and in some cases surpasses, the world's most watched spectator sports in terms of viewership, followership, and engagement. And it also has this unique way that esports professionals can interact with their community. You know, in more traditional sports, it's difficult, you know, when someone enters a stadium, it's difficult to call out every person walking in. Whereas in esports, you have that one-to-one communication. You know, you have people sending out tweets, players responding to tweets. You have them going on in their off time and streaming, and having that one-to-one communication with their fans that is difficult to do in other traditional sports. And as you said, in times like this, I mean, these are difficult times for everyone. But this has given us a chance as an esports and gaming community to show the potential that esports has to bring people together. Whether it's events, with Madden in the US, NBA 2K, FIFA football, all these events are happening to bring people together. And I'm very proud to say that we as CIFIS have started an event called Gamers Without Borders. This is a charitable online gaming event with the aim of uniting gamers around the globe in the fight against COVID-19. The money generated from this event will go to our partner organizations, such as UNICEF, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the International Medical Corps, the Norwegian Refugee Council, Direct Relief, King Salman Relief Center, and the International Telecoms Union. And this tournament, it has three distinct aspects, this event. The first is what we call Watch. And we're asking people to come and watch professional players at the top of their game play against each other. And for this, we have 48 professional players from 40 different countries who have so far raised $4.5 million for COVID-19 relief, with over 5 million viewers streaming in 7 different languages on our channels. And it's been amazing to see, all this, that community, the professional community come together. And the second aspect we call Game. And in the Game, it's a series of online tournaments, community tournaments, with the aim of, everybody's at home, everybody's staying safe. Well, let's give them something to keep them entertained. Let's give them something to watch, to take part in, to be a part of this international community. And also, we have what we would call our sponsors. Rather than sponsoring us as an initiative, we have them sponsoring what is essentially the community. So they are sponsoring in the way of giveaways to the people taking part in the tournament, in the form of donations to charity. And in these community tournaments, our most recent numbers, we have over 220,000 people who've registered so far, over $290,000 in prizes given from our sponsors to the community. Our winners have come from 21 different countries, but we've had participation from 72 different countries, which is, it's an amazing thing to see. And our third aspect, now that we've got all this community involved and we've got them all entertained, we want to give them that another level. So we have a third aspect that we're calling Learn. And this is in cooperation with the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology, where we've designed a series of webinars, hackathons, and programming sessions to help educate the audience about the industry. And we've had over 20,000 people registered from 80 different nationalities. And the amazing thing to me is we're only halfway through this event. Overall, by the end of this event, we will have donated $10 million, if not more, to charities from the professional tournaments. And we hope to be raising more from the community. And it gives us an opportunity to showcase how close-knit the gaming community is. And when given the opportunity, how they can come together across the world. I mean, our participants from all these different nationalities cover every continent, almost, many, many different countries around the world, and all coming together for one aim. And that's to come together, to game, to enjoy yourself, and to do good and donate to COVID-19. And I think it's amazing and a pleasure and an honor to be a part of something like that. And we also have, on a physical aspect, and I won't go into this in too much depth because I know they're coming up next. But we have a partnership with Saudi, in Saudi with the SFA that we call Move to Game, and this is using gaming to get people to move, and having people generate steps and generate movement through gaming. But again, I'll leave that for the professionals to go into. And just in closing, I'd like to again thank the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations and the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies for hosting this event. And thank you, all of you, for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be a part of this and a pleasure to be one of these great, in the same category as all these great panelists that are involved with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prince Faisal. We very much appreciate it. If I could, before we lose you, if I could just ask you one quick question. And again, I want to remind everyone that when you're as a speaker, when you're on, if we could just make sure that your video's on, so that we can all get the pleasure of seeing you as well as hearing you. I just want to be able to ask Prince Faisal, what's your personal connection with esports? Was there a particular game that you played that you loved, that got you involved in this when you were younger? Something that you reminisce about yourself?
Well, it depends on what you're asking. If you're asking gaming in general, I've played, pretty much the gamut. Everything from, Atari to Sega Genesis, Nintendo, Xbox, PlayStation. I've kind of run the whole gamut. If you're talking about professional esports, the only thing that I've ever come close to in esports, I'm quite an avid Madden player. I'm a big American football fan. I've tried to enter a few tournaments, but I'm not quite on the professional level yet. But I'm still hoping.
Fair enough. That's fantastic. Thank you. I grew up with a ColecoVision with an Atari 2600 adapter myself. We'd like to go next to Shaima Saleh Al Husseini. Shaima is the managing director of the Saudi Sports for All Federation. This is tasked with staging activities for all members of society, especially involving women. And she was previously a lecturer at the Saudi Institute for Public Administration and director of clubs and educational institutes at the General Sports Authority. Shaima, could we turn it over to you, and could you explain to us, what does Sports for All mean?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I would like to first thank the National Council and King Faisal Foundation for arranging this seminar. So Saudi Sports for All Federation is a grassroots organization. So as a grassroots organization, we get involved in grassroots diplomacy, developing dialogue and knowledge transfer with global organizations. And the reason we do that is to increase public participation in physical activity. We see it as contributing to society as well as individual development, whether it's in sports, whether it's in health, whether it's in education. And sports is actually a great influencer in making the world a better place, because sports is very inclusive as well as it's universal. So it's inclusive because it goes across all age groups, gender, race, and it builds friendships. It also strengthens the community, especially in Saudi. We're a very collective tribal community. So people like to do things in groups and like to do things together. Also, sports is very universal because it transcends language and across cultures, and it communicates across cultures as well. It also enables intercultural understanding and community transformation. And that's what Saudi is going through right now with the National Transformational Program. So for SFA in specific, which is the Saudi Sports for All Federation, we focus on grassroots sports as well as community-based physical activities. It's an essential element of our National Transformational Program, which was established by His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, in order to drive economic diversification for the future of the nation. And we can't do that without having well-educated, healthy, active population. And that's what we're trying to do with Sports for All. So our focus mainly is to build active and healthy nation and not focus on elite sports or competitive sports. So we're trying to make sports actually a way of life, and our focus is strong impact and sustainability. So that includes young children, it includes adults, families, the older generation as well, because by 2030, we want to get 40% of the population active in Saudi. Going back to what Prince Faisal just mentioned, and during this COVID-19 pandemic, we're trying to get also people active in their houses as well. So we have 3 different campaigns that we launched. The first and these campaigns are trying to reach and motivate people because during these times, it's very important to focus on mental health as well as physical health as well as nutrition, because people are not moving a lot. So we do that by looking after their mental and well-being by giving online advice, guidance, support through multiple campaigns that we did. And one of these campaigns was in collaboration with the Saudi Electronic and Intellectual Federation with Prince Faisal. And we also cooperated with WHO on this campaign. We donated 1 billion, we contributed 1 billion steps, and their goal was 10 billion steps for the WHO. And we did that because, like Prince Faisal said, there's a lot of interest, and people are actually interacting with e-gaming as well as physical activity. So we had more than almost 60,000 people participated in less than 2 weeks, and we're just halfway there. We're gonna continue to do it for a whole month and maybe extend it according to how the population are interested in extending these programs. Something that we also focus on is team sports because they are already popular in Saudi. So especially football and basketball. Basketball is actually a green field in Saudi now, where a lot of people are. We're increasing activity in basketball, and we are introducing different tournaments and leagues, of course, with different entities such as the school federation, the university federation, a lot of giga projects like Gidea, who are interested in actually creating leagues in order to increase participation in Saudi, as well as tournaments of all levels. So we start at grassroots and we go all the way to universities. Another thing that I want to tap into is how sports creates cross-border alliances and with other countries, different organizations. And there's a lot of positive experience in that because it just shows the community how they can develop themselves to show international presence later on. So, for example, we are active members of TAFISA, which is the international body for sports for all. We also cooperate with the World Health Organization, UNESCO, the UN, and the International Olympic Committee, especially that we are part of a bigger, we are part of the sports sector, which is the Ministry of Sports and the Saudi Arabian Olympic Committee. And we focus a little bit on women excelling in sports because this is a new sector in Saudi when it comes to women. So PE has just been enrolled in girls' schools in Saudi around 3 years ago. And their international presence is very important for 2 reasons. The first one is to develop knowledge of our kingdom and to show the capabilities of the girls in this kingdom. And the second reason is to build bridges across cultural divisions. And one example is we established the Women Football League earlier this year. And even before we established this league, we had participated in the national Global Girls World Cup, which is it's a competition under the umbrella of the UN, where multiple teams compete worldwide to support specific SDGs, and they play a football game, so they get multiple points on supporting the SDG and the different campaigns they did for that, as well as the game itself. And the girls won 2nd place, and it's their first international participation. And they participated in New York in the UN Assembly last year. And I think that's a good boost for the females in Saudi, to show them that even though we are a bit late in implementing these programs, the turnaround is very strong and fast in Saudi.
That's fantastic, Shaima. We very much appreciate that. We'll hopefully come back in the Q&A and we can do some more at the very end. Next, I'd like to go to our next speaker, Mark Clark. Mark Clark is CEO of Generations for Peace. This is a Jordan-based organization using sports and other activities to build peace-building activities among youth in all sorts of parts of the world. He joined the organization in 2011, previously living in Papua New Guinea, where he was working for Australia's Agency for International Development to help develop their sports program there. He also worked in the DRC, in Iraq, and in India. He's a graduate of Oxford and Edinburgh, among other schools, and was a British Army officer as well as an official in the FCO. Mark, I'd like to turn it over to you and ask you, can you explain to us what Generations for Peace does, how they do it, and what you feel are some of the accomplishments the organization has achieved?
Well, thank you. And may I begin by saying, Your Royal Highness, dear friends, I'm joining you today from my home in Amman, Jordan. I think many of us are calling in from lockdown conditions. I want to thank the King Faisal Center, the National Council for US Arab Relations, and the State Department's sport diplomacy team for convening this conversation today. And it's an honor to be included amongst such esteemed company on this panel to share the journey of Generations for Peace. I think for many of our speakers today, my own part in the Generations for Peace journey really begins with my personal passion for sport. And I think many of us feel that and have experienced sport in many different ways. I was very fortunate to be exposed to many sports as a young person growing up. I particularly enjoyed team sports, especially rugby, but also field hockey. And I also participated in individual disciplines like karate, squash, long distance running, and so on. And in my professional life, prior to joining Generations for Peace, I've been involved in a variety of sport for good, sport for development, sport for peace programs of some sort or another since 2003. So just to give a few examples of the stepping stones towards my experience with Generations for Peace. In Iraq, we were involved in using grassroots sport activity in youth centers across the country to engage youth. This is in the period 2003, 2004, 2005, and to engage especially young male youth, to involve them in positive activities. And it was really a security-led agenda in those years. But we were also involved in elite sport during those years in supporting the re-establishment of a new Iraqi Olympic Committee, and through a democratic process of elections that created a secular structure with Sunni and Shia, Kurds and Arabs, women included on the new Olympic Committee. And for a time, it was a small good news story of what a democratic process could produce in terms of a structure in Iraq. And I was privileged to then support that Olympic Committee and to go with the Iraqi team to participate in the Athens 2004 Olympic Games, where incredibly the young Iraqi football team came fourth, losing in the bronze medal playoff match to Italy. And from Iraq, I went to Congo, as Josh said, working in Democratic Republic of Congo, again, using sport as an entry point to engage youth, but this time to engage youth in awareness and education about HIV and AIDS. And it's from DRC that I went to Papua New Guinea. And this was a much more ambitious 10-year Sport for Development initiative, a partnership between the Australian government and the Papua New Guinean government, using sport again as an entry point, but also as a vehicle for positive change, for HIV/AIDS education, but also addressing other issues of conflict and violence. So in urban centers, looking at youth gangs and problems with homebrew alcohol and crime. In the highlands of the country, looking at tribal fighting and using sport as a vehicle for engagement between different villages. Also looking at systemic violence against women across the country and looking at how to empower girls and women through the vehicle of sport. And looking at post-conflict reconciliation in Bougainville that had endured a very violent civil war. So that exposed me to a variety of different contexts in which sport consistently was an entry point and a vehicle for behavior change. And so joining Generations for Peace in January 2011, just before the Arab Spring, and so much has changed in our region since then, I joined to serve as CEO, and I think I'm really passionate. Apart from my passion for sport, I'm passionate about what it can do. So I'm passionate about transformational change, firstly in individuals and then in communities, but I also have a deep passion about organizational change. And Generations for Peace has been on an incredible journey, an incredible learning journey, and an evolution of quite a steep growth curve over the last 9 and a bit years since I joined. And so I feel very fortunate that my role encompasses those 3 domains I'm really interested and curious about. Generations for Peace has its roots in the Olympic movement and the global sport movement. It was founded by His Royal Highness Prince Faisal Al Hussein of Jordan in 2007, explicitly as a peace through sport initiative of the Jordan Olympic Committee. And its mission was really to combine the idea of grassroots sport engagement, something His Royal Highness Prince Faisal was extremely passionate about, with the idea of a peace-building mission, and that peace-building is really about developing approaches to engage young people, long-term peace-building, and build the attitudes and competencies that can sustain tolerance across different identity divides. And so ultimately, all Generations for Peace programs use sport and now other tools as well to promote 4 values. And so these 4 values are firstly youth leadership. And I think on this panel, we can all understand how effective different sport engagement can be in exposing young people to opportunities, not to learn leadership in a classroom, but really to practice it, to have opportunities to demonstrate their own leadership amongst other young people, amongst their peers, in a team, but also to demonstrate their leadership in projects and activities in their wider community. Our second value is community empowerment. So really this idea of being focused at grassroots level and really listening to and responding to local needs, and finding consistently that sport, it is a universal language. This doesn't mean that the same sports are popular in every community on the planet, but on every community on the planet, there is some sport activity being played. And so it's available as an entry point, especially to engage young people. But more than that, it's a vehicle into which you can integrate behavior change education and really get sustainable change. Our third value is active tolerance. So this idea that across different identity divides, there are often conflicts. There's often a communication gap. And so again, sport being a universal language, it offers a different space, a safe space, if the sport activity is well facilitated, to bring people together across conflict divides, to engage with each other, and to enjoy this passion that they all share, this particular sport. And to develop this idea of, through experiencing the other, you can firstly break the stereotypes between different identity groups, build deeper understanding, respect, and trust, and then to understand that there is great value in those experiences. So there is value in diversity. And that's really what we mean by active tolerance, getting people to reach the point where they are actively seeking to engage others beyond their own identity group. And our fourth and final value is responsible citizenship. This idea that at the grassroots level in a community, every member of that community is a citizen of that community. So this is really at local level, not thinking of citizens as the holder of a passport of a nation state, but really everyone belongs to their own local community. And as a citizen at that level, they have a responsibility to contribute what they can with their talents and their strengths to the future of their own community. And it really links back to this youth leadership idea that even youth have a really important role to play and a huge potential to contribute as peace builders and as actors in development in ways that are often overlooked. So Generations for Peace is now 13 years old. We're ranked number 26 in the top 500 NGOs in the world by NGO Advisor based in Geneva. That makes us the number 3 peace building NGO on their ranking. And we're also the only Peace Through Sport organization officially recognized by the International Olympic Committee. So we've come quite a long way, and we're getting certain recognition for our work, but we still feel like a young organization. You know, at 13 years old, we're just a teenager, and we want to continue that learning journey. And that learning journey has really been about experimenting and testing. Firstly, testing this founding concept that sport can be a vehicle for peace building, testing it in many countries. Over the last 13 years, we've done programming in communities in 51 countries across the Middle East and North Africa, but also sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia, the Balkans, and most recently, our first ever program in the USA. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And through that exposure in very diverse conflict settings, different developmental settings, and of course, different sport and cultural settings, we've developed a curriculum. It's a peace-building curriculum, but it includes an understanding of the power of sport to engage, to be a vehicle for sustained behavior change. And we've been doing that through what is really a volunteer model. So over the last 13 years, we've trained more than 15,500 youth leaders. And the training is really just the beginning of a long-term relationship with them. We believe very much in the long-term commitment by us to them, and it's reciprocated. We support with training and mentoring, and then advanced training, specialized training. And it's really a long-term journey that our volunteers stay with us for 6, 7, 8 and more years. And why is that relationship so uniquely special? I think it's because young people around the world, across the Middle East and beyond, are often experiencing programs that are very stop-start, where they have a exposure, an opportunity perhaps to a short training, a seminar, a conference, a workshop, but without any programmatic support, where they can actually take what they learned in the training or the workshop and still be supported to apply it to their own context and to try and achieve the change that they themselves want to see in their own communities. So that's really been our model with these 15,500 youth leaders around the world. And then what do they do? What do they achieve with their own programs? Well, they've been engaging children and other youth and adults in a variety of settings and have impacted a little over 740,000 target group participants. I mentioned sport, but we're also finding part of our lessons learned has been a shift away from using pure sport activities, the type of sport codes that I grew up playing and many of us on the panel are familiar with, to find actually sport-based games that still use the energy of sport, the competitive element of team sport play, some sort of sport equipment, but they're very much games that are not explicitly the official sport codes. And this has the advantage of, firstly, lowering the barrier of entry. We found that with the official sport codes, as you enter a community and start saying it's going to be a football or soccer-based program or a basketball program or a volleyball program or whatever sport you care to mention, young people would immediately have a barrier in their mind. They would immediately be making a choice. Oh, I know I'm good at that sport, so I'll participate, or I know I'm not good at that sport and I'm not going to want to participate. So by making them sport-based games, it lowers the barrier to entry. And in particular, in the Middle East region, that's critically important when we look at maximizing the participation of girls and female participants in these activities. The second advantage was that the sport-based games can be much, much more intentional in integrating the behavior change education that we want to see. And we did comparative studies where we see actually the impact is higher, but it's also sustained longer through doing sport-based game programming rather than pure sport programming. I do believe there is a significant place in the development spectrum for sport programming that uses official sport codes, and the academic literature makes a nice distinction between sport plus and plus sport. And so we would consider Generations for Peace is really positioned in the plus sport end of that developmental spectrum. I want to credit the US State Department also, giving an example of our programming and how it's reached scale. Here in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, it was a small grant from the State Department's MEPI program some 7 years ago that initiated a pilot program beginning to look at the issue of systemic violence in public schools in Jordan. And the pilot was looking at just 4 schools. And over the last 7 years, I'm proud to say, and I'm sure Ryan and others in the State Department will be proud to hear, we've expanded that program. MEPI was the catalyst, and we've expanded that program now to 1,000 schools, engaging every public school student in Jordan aged 12 to 16. And we're using sport-based games that are now integrated into the Ministry of Education curriculum and integrated into the school day, where before they were after-school activities. And I think that's an important journey that also illustrates how important it is to engage existing structures. If you want to achieve sport-based programming at scale, you have to find the strong existing structures that are available to you, not bypass them and set up alternative parallel structures. And you have to then invest a lot in the knowledge transfer, the capacity building, and the mentoring of the human capital within those structures. So in our case, with that sport in schools program, training and mentoring school teachers right across the kingdom, but also Ministry of Education officials at national and subnational level. And we have a similar program in parallel with the Ministry of Youth here in Jordan in youth centers right across the country. And I think the context of Jordan, you'll be very aware of the Syrian refugee crisis. So there were plenty of pre-existing developmental issues in Jordan, including violence in schools. But the Syrian refugee crisis and the additional number of young people of school age really placed an enormous burden on communities right across Jordan. And our focus over the last 7 years in that context has been in host communities. More than 80% of Syrian refugees in Jordan live in host communities, not in the large refugee camps. And so it's in these host communities where there are enormous pressures on every public service, on schooling, but also on healthcare, on sanitation, on also shelter and accommodation, and of course on formal and informal employment. So these are communities under enormous pressures. And as such, communities, both Jordanians and Syrian refugees, began to resort to extreme coping mechanisms. And so, we saw an increase in child labor, in early marriage, in crime, and in violence, and not just violence between Jordanians and Syrians, but also just amongst Jordanians and amongst Syrians. So sport is a great vehicle to enter a community, to engage systemically in schools, in youth centers, and to really support this social cohesion, to reduce tensions, and to support youth volunteerism, youth leadership, this sense of active tolerance and responsible citizenship I referred to. I think we're also grateful for the opportunity to work around the world. And I mentioned our first ever program in the USA began last year. And it's engaging youth in violence reduction on the south side of Chicago in partnership with the Gary Comer Youth Center based there and with support from Laureus Sport for Good Foundation. And so this is quite an interesting narrative. So for an NGO based in Jordan, but working around the world, to come into a context like the south side of Chicago, to come from the Middle East to the USA and to support violence reduction there, it seems to flip the narrative, which typically has the flow of knowledge and competencies and experience in the reverse direction. But it's not by accident. I think there are already very strong links between Jordan and the USA, and also between Chicago and Amman. They are sister cities. There's a link between the mayor of Amman and the mayor of Chicago. And I think the opportunity for youth from Chicago to come to Jordan as they did last year and to experience a different culture, a different setting, but to share something in common, that they are both youth in Jordan and in our programs around the world and youth in Chicago are harnessing something they're passionate about, the power of sport, and using it for good in their own communities, to reduce violence and promote more tolerant and non-violent ways of acting. I want to close with just one comment on the dominant challenge I think we are all facing with COVID-19, and the fact it's not only a public health crisis, but it's also an economic crisis that's going to definitely hit the sports sector and the sport for good sector. And it's also a social crisis. We're seeing different increases in violence and other developmental issues. And that's only going to be further exacerbated as the economic crisis really starts biting. So I think sport and sport for good organizations needs to maintain their relevance and to pivot their youth engagement and their sport for development programs to be relevant in that context. And Generations Peace has firstly been doing a lot of transfer of our trainings into digital trainings, of course, like many organizations. But we've even been promoting our sport-based games to stay home activities that young people can do in their own households, even under extreme lockdown conditions, the very strict curfew that Jordan has been experiencing, for example. And then looking ahead, as every country around the world looks at how to lift lockdown conditions, we've been looking at the protocols, the safety protocols that need to be in place as you begin to engage young people again in the real world. How can our sport activities and our sport-based games be conducted safely? What sort of distancing measures need to be in place? What sort of sanitization and protection measures need to be in place? And we all long, I think, for the day when we can return to that. But these protocols are going to be very important as a middle step through that transition. So very grateful for the opportunity to be on the panel. And it's a privilege to be amongst such company. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. We're so happy that you were able to join us today. There's two issues that you highlighted, which I think are really critical, and maybe we'll come back to them at the end for all the speakers. One of them is the how you develop public-private partnerships, which your organization has done in many cases. But every new location that you work in and every new activity you do, you have to recreate that relationship between the private sector and the public sector, and that can be very challenging. And the second issue you raised, which I hope our other speakers will also address, is sustainability. Not just sustainability of conventional programs, which itself is a challenge. Keeping a program going over 6, 7, 8 years is extraordinary. Most NGOs don't make it past a year or two. Once their money from their sponsor runs out, it's pretty much dead. So being able to sustain the conventional program many years in the future is a real challenge and a real trick. But to do that under the current circumstances, it's even a greater challenge. Who knows if the programming that we're doing today, the types of programs that we're doing online through various organizations, whether any of that will be relevant another 2 years from now or 3 years from now, or maybe it'll be more relevant. It's really hard to say at this point. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kemp Goulden, our next speaker. Kemp, based here in Washington, D.C., is the president and founder of Because Baseball. It's a nonprofit dedicated to bringing baseball to youth in the Arab world. I'd love it if Kemp could explain for us a bit of what he's accomplished, what he's managed, both in Egypt and what his goals are for other places. I'll turn it over to him now. Kemp.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Josh. I am very excited to be here amongst such esteemed company. I'd just like to thank the King Faisal Center and thank the National Council for putting together such an incredible panel and giving us this platform to talk a little bit about all the exciting things we're doing right now in baseball in the region. And, you know, to pick up on Josh's point, we launched a couple years ago, basically with 40 kids and their parents learning baseball. In the past year, we had 2,500 kids. and their parents who are learning the game of baseball. So remarkable growth. But what is Because Baseball? So our motto is bringing people together through baseball. I grew up with the sport, and I recognize its ability to bring people together at three distinct levels. The family level, learn to play with your mom and dad. The community level, in my neighborhood, it was baseball that brought all the kids together who went to different schools, who came from different backgrounds. It was baseball in the streets of Richmond, Virginia, and in the side yards, in the parks, that brought us together. And then at the cultural level, baseball served a defining role in breaking down the race barrier, the color barrier in our country. It was Jackie Robinson who, before politics, policy, even in many ways, the hearts and minds of America at large could get there. Jackie Robinson in baseball broke through a division that a lot of people wondered, could it ever be broken? Taking those lessons, I looked and said, we live in a world today full of conflict. And what better way to continue to bring people together than baseball? And so we began in Egypt. And my vision was to use baseball to bring people together, again, at the family, community, and cultural levels. And we've seen extraordinary success in that capacity in the few years that we've been in operation. At the family level, we have mothers and fathers. Just picture moms throwing with their sons, dads throwing with their daughters, because that's what's happening on fields and streets of Cairo right now. At the community level, we have people from all walks of life, all worldviews. So, just as an example, we have rich kids from the elite families, middle-class kids, poor kids, orphans, all playing together, learning a beautiful game of baseball, and learning to communicate and relate on the field of play. At the cultural level, the game is taught by a combination of American and Egyptian adult volunteers. And, it's been remarkable to watch the lesson that these kids learn as they see adults, Egyptians, coaching with adult Americans. I mean, we can sit there and have all sorts of lessons on tolerance, on unity. We can talk people's ears off, but the modeling of that behavior in their everyday life, in their everyday play, leaves a lasting impact and imprint on their minds and hopefully on the way that they look at their fellow man. And this goes both ways, because part of some of the things we've talked about are sustainability today, not just having one-off events. And part of our vision as we continue to bring baseball as this vehicle for cross-cultural, cross-community, inter-family community building, with all these things, we have to think, how do we sustain this? And one of the ways is continuing to train parents and adults, especially PE teachers, so that they can pass it on to kids in their own schools. And, what's been fun is we brought over one of our Egyptian volunteer coaches, a teacher. His name is Waleed, to the United States. He spent time at the collegiate school in Richmond, Virginia, where he worked with the PE staff, learned what it was like to be a Western athletic director, and then he serves as an assistant coach on the varsity baseball team, really getting incredible exposure to all these levels. So he returned to Egypt as the most highly trained coach in Egyptian baseball history. But and that's a great accomplishment in itself from a purely sport perspective. But I think when I look back on that time, and I think when people at collegiate, and Waleed really looks back on his experience, the most powerful take-home lesson for him and the most powerful take-home lesson for the community was how he changed perceptions of a country and of a people there in Richmond, Virginia. So over the course of time, Waleed he became integral to this community. And he, would pass down the halls. Everyone would say hi, give him five. I mean, everyone knew in a 1,500-person school knew Waleed before he left. He taught them all about Egyptian culture, about ancient Egyptian culture, about modern Egyptian culture, showing them that it was more than just pyramids, and that these are human beings that interact in an awesome, really powerful way. And I think the most poignant moment for me was Waleed's last day at Collegiate. I had the privilege to go watch the baseball game as he finished up. And at the end of the game, after Collegiate had won their baseball game, there was this sort of revelation you could hear amongst the kids as they said, wait, this is Waleed's last game. And I watched as they all surrounded Waleed and chanted for him, and then one by one, when the cameras weren't rolling, when no one was watching, embraced him. It was real love. It was real understanding. It was real relationship, friendship building that occurred through the sport of baseball. And I remember one of the kids saying to me after it was over, when Waleed arrived, I wondered, what's happening here? How does he fit into this whole baseball school thing? And he said, now that Waleed's leaving, I can't imagine baseball and Collegiate without him. And again, to me, individual anecdotal stories like that show the power of sport. And so our vision as we move forward in Egypt and in the region at large is to continue to expand, to continue to work with schools, train PE teachers, raise a next generation of baseball players so that we see Olympians, professionals enter into the ranks of baseball players. And so while Egypt was the start of our endeavor, one of my great passions and visions is to see the next stop to be Saudi Arabia for baseball. So I'm very excited just imagining a generation of young kids in Saudi and their parents learning this game, loving this game, and finding this new medium that is sport, baseball, to connect, to communicate, to build friendships with people both within their society and across the ocean. So I'm very excited about that. I would say, one other topic that people have been talking about is this time of COVID-19 and how that affects sports. And as I think has been outlined by a number of people, the effect, the ramifications are massive. And so what we've been thinking through is how do we meet that, the time, meet the frame that we're in. And so one of the things we're doing is we're going to create a series of videos, and we're actually in production right now, that helps young kids make baseballs, because in the Arab world, for example, you're not going to find a ton of baseballs yet, but it's on our way with partners like Franklin and New Era, New Balance, Shut Sports, and in Major League Baseball. We're on our way there, and the amount of equipment that these schools have been given and donated by our incredible private partners is remarkable. But for the kids that don't have access to this at home and who are cooped up in their house, probably driving their parents crazy, this will be an opportunity for them to participate in a craft, sort of arts and crafts, where they build a ball with household equipment and then are taught by a former professional coach, former professional player, current college coach, taught basic drills that'll get them active, keep them engaged, get them excited, continue to share with our great friends in the Arab world the sport of baseball. So I'm excited about that time when the kids will be able to get back together, when they'll be able to give each other high fives and embrace. And I think we're excited about that for all of society. But in the meantime, I'm continually excited about sports' ability to bring people together, even in this time of continued isolation. Thanks for letting me be here today. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to answering any questions later on.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate that. If you can mute for a minute. If I can just ask one question while we have you here before we move on to the next. I want to clarify, you built all of this in Egypt from scratch. You didn't do this with any governmental help. You worked entirely with private sector donors to bring in equipment, to do the educational curriculum element, to get the permission to operate in this area. And you didn't have any diamonds to work with when you showed up. Can you just explain what that was like, starting from nothing and doing this entirely on a non-governmental basis?
Well, I mean, Josh, first and foremost, it's remarkably gratifying when you see a vision start to take on flesh and bones and become a reality. But what's more remarkable is when you see the kids embrace the vision, right? The kids came because this was a brand new thing for them, but they stayed because they love the sport and because they were having a lot of fun. And so it's funny you mentioned we had no diamonds. there are a ton of diamond in the rough baseball players that we've already discovered in Egypt. One of my board members is Bobby Evans. He's the former San Francisco Giants general manager. He and the Giants are actually another one of our private partners and donors to the cause. But Bobby, who's on my board, came over, and he, I think the most telling statement, just from a purely talent standpoint, is that he saw a lot of those kids that would be in the top 25% of their age bracket if they were here in the United States playing baseball. So there's talent. I don't think that surprises anyone on this at this meeting. However, it's still worth noting, and it caught the eye of people within Major League Baseball. But I think there's a freedom and an incredible excitement to work with private partners because they see an opportunity to be a part of a beautiful story and to share a game that they love, that is really their lifeblood. I mean, these are companies that make equipment. These are companies that it's baseball that is their economic lifeblood, but they love the story. They have a heart as well for the mission of Because Baseball, for bringing people together and watching these great names come together. I mean, Josh, just quite frankly, it is gratifying, and it is, it just confirms, I think, a belief that all of us on this call share, that sport is a powerful bridge building vehicle. And baseball, as we're seeing right now, is certainly hitting a home run in the region in that department.
Indeed, baseball is the one sport right now that is coming back in some parts of the world, albeit without people in the stadiums. But it is certainly the first sport that's been coming back. With that in mind, let's turn now to Ryan Murphy. Ryan is the program officer with the Sports Diplomacy Division of the U.S. State Department. He's been in that position since 2009, directly overseeing the International Sports Programming Initiative. He's also State Department's liaison to the U.S. Olympic Committee. He has an MA in International Sports Law and an MSc in Sports and Recreation Management, just to show how much this person has dedicated his life to sports and sports diplomacy. Ryan, would you like to take it over?
Yeah, thank you very much, Josh. I appreciate being involved in this panel, and thank you to the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, as well as the King Faisal Center for helping really stand up this forum. I really wanted to talk about sports diplomacy in general and the U.S. government's role. The U.S. Department of State stood up the Sports Diplomacy Division in 2002, originally as a Muslim outreach tool to really engage youth and communities in underserved, underprivileged communities overseas. The Sports Diplomacy Division is housed within the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs within the U.S. Department of State. And our federal mandate from Congress is people-to-people exchanges. Both Mark and Kemp touched on really the relationship within their organizations and that personal story. Kemp really nailed it when he talked about the baseball coach from Egypt that came to the U.S. and had that impact on the local community in Richmond, Virginia. That's really the basis of what we do, and why we do it is really bringing people together, communities together through sports. Now, the Bureau itself has a lot of different ways that they bring people together. We have youth programs, arts programs, culture, music, dance, educational programs, academic programs, but we specifically use sports as that tool, sports as that hook to bring those communities together. Like I said, we really have this federal mandate from Congress to bring these communities together and establish linkages, not only at the national level, but also at the community level. The U.S. does not have a Ministry of Sports, so it's very grassroots development up rather than top down, such as most other countries. So it's great that we are able to work with some of these grassroots NGOs and organizations to help implement sports programs. We really do this through 4 main programs. Our first program is our International Sports Programming Initiative. As Josh said, that's the program that I oversee. And we really utilize this to bring people together and establish those linkages at the NGO level. We provide funding to US-based nonprofit organizations and public universities to help us implement these two-way exchanges. We work on a regional level. We provide cooperative agreements to these US-based organizations. They help us implement these two-way exchanges. So we send groups of Americans overseas to work with in-country partners overseas to deliver these public diplomacy programs. And we also work with those in-country programs overseas, as well as the US embassies and US consulates to recruit athletes and coaches and administrators to come to the US for the reciprocal exchange. We've been implementing these programs since 2002. It was really the first program that we started. Soon after that, we started bringing youth and administrators and coaches to the US through our sports visitor program. And it started out as really this 2-week sports cultural exchange, bringing these youth coaches and administrators to the US for this exchange, really showing them what US society is through the lens of sports. We had them involved in US schools and seeing how education is tied to the sports structure here in the US. We had them really seeing how there's certain federal legislations that impact sports here in the US. The Americans with Disabilities Act that was implemented 30 years ago. This is the 30th anniversary of that law that really increased the opportunities for individuals with disabilities to be engaged in sports. We also have Title IX, which is a gender equity law that really increased the engagement of individuals with, women and girls to participate in sports. And those are just some of the unique situations that we really touch on during those visitor programs. On the flip side, our reciprocal outbound exchange is our sports visitor or sports envoy program. We work with the US leagues and federations, the US Olympic Committee, National Basketball Association, Major League Baseball, as well as others, to identify current and former athletes, professional Olympic level athletes and coaches to travel overseas to work with our US embassies and consulates. And they're on the ground for about 5 days and really delivering public diplomacy messaging, putting on camps and clinics, and really engaging local communities overseas. A lot of times for these underserved, underprivileged communities, it's the first time they're really engaging with an American. So it's good for them to see and hear from those individuals. And then our last program is our Global Sports Mentoring Program. We stood up this program in 2012 as originally our Empowering Women and Girls Through Sports initiative, which included this mentorship component. It's a month-long mentorship component where we bring about 15 to 20 mid-level to female or high-level female executives from around the globe to the US, and they're paired with female mentors here in the US. And they go through a week-long orientation, about 3 weeks or so in the communities with their host mentor, and then develop action plans and go home to their communities and implement these action plans. That program was so successful that a few years ago, we stood up a sister program to that, which is our Sport for Community program. And that is really focused on disability sports and adapted sports. Same mentor, same model, and bringing about the same number of those individuals here to the US for that program. So really, we have all these programs going on. We do a lot within the region. We have a number of international sports programming initiative programs that are being stood up by one of our implementers. We recently did a program on sport and health in Bahrain, and that was through a two-way reciprocal exchange through a number of partners. We have about 27 global sports mentorship program participants from about 10 different countries within the region that have come to the US on that program. In September of 2018, we did a sports visitor program where we brought Saudi women's soccer coaches to the US. And we actually were able to work with the Saudi Sport for All Federation on that program and it's great to have them represented here. So a number of different things that we've done throughout the region. We have kind of pivoted during all of this COVID-19 situation. Obviously, we can't do our bread and butter, which are our people-to-people exchanges. So we're doing a lot more virtually. We have stood up a Get Fit campaign where we work with our sports envoys to do a fitness kind of talk as well as fitness sessions with one of my colleagues who runs that program. And we're actually doing a session tomorrow with Abdel Nader, who's an Egyptian-born American basketball player, plays in the NBA for the Oklahoma Thunder. And he is doing a session tomorrow with us at 11 a.m. And feel free to tune into that. It's at Sports Diplomacy Division, which is our Facebook feed. And I think it's going to get a great following, obviously, within the region. So I'll leave it at that. I know we're running a little long, but I'll happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Speaking of basketball, our next speaker, Huzaifa Al-Maleh, is a former international basketball player, formerly a member of the Syrian national basketball team, and someone who now lives in the United States managing his own small business. The goal here with Huzaifa was to be able to present a personal story from an Arab athlete who has lived and participated in Western sports, to be able to share some insights and thoughts on his experiences of what it's like to bridge that divide between the Arab world and the American world on sports. Huzaifa, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Josh, thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you today. And I would like to thank the National Council as well as King Faisal Center for having such a great conversation about the sports diplomacy, which is, I believe, as an international basketball player, this is the best way to build the bridge between United States and the Arab world. The reason why I would like to put the lights on my story, my career as a basketball player for over 12 years, is basically to be an inspiration for all the new generation who had the same dreams, who wanted to reach their dream. Even in the Holy Book, God gave us his most valuable lessons and inspiration through stories from prophets and righteous, so the next generation and all human being can learn from and adapt to and take it as an example. I grew up in Damascus, where soccer is the #1 sport, just like any other place in all of Middle East. However, basketball, it's always been one of the most prominent sports in the area. I joined one of the best team in the capital of Damascus for a summer camp under 16 years old. And soon after that, I played with the team under 16, and soon I joined the national team as well. It's been a great journey, and this is the main reason why everybody need to hear it. It's not because it's my story; it's what's coming from that story. It's the moral of story. At the age when I joined the national team, we played our first international game, and I can still remember this game till this day. We weren't prepared with the little resources we had at that time. And we faced a team, they were really prepared. They had everything, players, coaches, assistant coaches, staff, doctors, equipments. They were prepared. And we lost the game. And it was a very tough loss. And I remember after the game, I was in my room, very sad, very angry. And all I could think of, I want to get better. And I want to play basketball on the highest level on all aspects. And here was the birth of my dream of being the first Syrian in the NBA. For many years, when I was growing up, I want to do something really special. I want to be an inspiration. I want to make history. but I really didn't know how I'm going to reach this goal. But soon as I make decision and I found out I want to be the first year in the NBA, that dream took over my life. And I was chasing that dream like I never chased anything before. During my travel and my journey in basketball, my most favorite time and the time I value the most is the time I spent to get to know my foreign American teammates, where I help coaches translate for plays, exercises, help them adapt to the culture overseas. And that creates such a great bond and brotherhoods between us. And it carries with us all over the tournament we play in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Jordan, Morocco, Syria, Lebanon. And it was just tremendous connection we had between each other. Soon after I was received my scholarship to study at the International Arab University, where I finished my education in business school. And after that, I had the opportunity to play for the national team and gain more experience. Soon later, the war broke out in Syria. And at that time, I knew I have to search for international opportunities in order to achieve my dreams. I came to USA in 2014, where I played in Chicago, and I would say that was the best time in my life. I get to reunited with all my teammates who I played with overseas, and we all played in Chicago in the Shy League, alongside with high elite NBA players. My first game, maybe one of the most memory that stick in my mind till this day. I remember I came into the gym, I was scared, I was very nervous, and in the middle of the first quarter, the coach called my name and asked me to sub one of the NBA players. I froze for a second, but right away I ran to the sideline and asked the ref to put me in. And I can still remember at that time, people were like talking, like laughing. They didn't know who I am. Even the commentator couldn't pronounce my name. And it was funny. But the moment I hit the court, I had to do what I was there to do. I had a couple of quick baskets, a couple of quick assists, and we were down by 6 points, and that tied the game and make the coach take a timeout right away. Everything had changed at that point. The fans got excited. My teammate went crazy, and I didn't know what's going on, but I just kept going. We won that game, and we went to the second round in the final. Soon after the Shy League, reality hit again. NBA season was about to start, and I knew that I have to start from scratch. I knew for me to reach my dream, I have to start from zero. I joined the ABA. I was invited to play in the ABA, which is the American Basketball Association. I played for the Chicago, for the Windy City Bulls for almost 2 seasons. It was a tough experience. Especially my first year with the team. I was trying to adapt to the basketball game in the state. It wasn't easy. It's a completely different. Overseas basketball, more about plays, system around defense and offense. Where here in the state, system is very important, but also it's important how to put all this highly talented individual together to create an harmonious team. After my first year, my second year, everything got better. I was more comfortable to show my character on the court. I was more comfortable to show what I'm made of, and I had to back up my dreams with action, and things start getting better from there. And I remember after playing in the ABA for 2 seasons, I got connected with a new manager, or actually new agent, where he secured 3 major connections for me. First, it was with the Bulls organization, where I met with someone in their management who showed interest of having this first year in the NBA with them, especially Chicago being such a diverse city. And then I had the opportunity to work out with being invited for another tryout with the Charlotte Hornets in North Carolina, and then with the Washington Wizards through their G League team here. Especially lately, the G League was more officially affiliated with the NBA, and it was a time for me to seek a real serious opportunity to play in the NBA. After those tryouts, sadly, it didn't work. And I knew at that point, I have to focus on my life, on my business, especially after I got married in Chicago. I wanted to focus more on my life to be able to sustain and keep working on my dream. However, at that time, I noticed that maybe I'm not playing the NBA, maybe I'm not the first season in the NBA, but this is the moral of the story. So yes, absolutely, you have to set up your dream, set up your goal, but at the same time, you never know where life takes you. God always have good plans for you, maybe better plans than the one you had already. I changed my dream from wanting to be the first seed in the NBA and play in the NBA to much bigger dream. I wanted to bring the NBA to the Middle East. I want all those young generation to feel like I can still live this beautiful journey. There's nothing impossible. I can still follow my passion. And here, during my time here in the state, I was participating and engaging in too many basketball academies and programs, such in Chicago Basketball Academy, where we work on helping young athletes who didn't get a chance to be drafted or play in the NBA to go play overseas and have a unique experience in playing in the Middle East. It was beautiful. And then I also work with a basketball school here in DC called Skill Society, run by Coach Crouch, who's an amazing teacher and leader for all the young athletes here in the area, in the DMV area, and also as well with great NBA, NCAA, WNBA players on the highest level. However, I still had to focus on my business. And at that time, me and my wife, we took over ownership for a boutique cafe here in the heart of McLean, where we serve the community proudly every day. And I found another passion for me. I found a passion of giving back, found the importance of not only chasing your dream, but being part of other people's dream. You can, in this community here in the state, it's very important to give back, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your profession. It's all about what you can offer and give back, and that's what makes you feel better. It makes you feel like I'm on the right path. It was tough transition. However, it was very enjoyable, very interesting. I feel like it's very essential to be on this point, and that's where my travel and all my inspirational journey is start to make sense to be able to translate it to people.
Hold on to that thought. Hold on to that thought, Huzaifa. That's beautiful. We're running out of time. Bismillah, that is fantastic. I love hearing those stories, and I wish we had more time to hear more of them. But it's true that this is where life takes you, and it's a beautiful place. So what we need to do, though, with the limited time that we have left, is go to Dr. Heidi Al-Askari. Dr. Heidi, the CEO of the Saudi Arabian Special Olympics Committee. She's on the board and a member of all sorts of associations in the kingdom, the Down Syndrome Charitable Association, the Association for Hearing Impairment, the Society for Rehabilitation and Education. What I'd like Dr. Heidi to do is to be able to respond a bit to what we've heard so far and offer us a couple insights of what it's like working in the Special Olympics Committee and dealing with athletes with special challenges. Dr. Heidi, and if we could all, the rest of us, mute our microphones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joshua. It's a pleasure to be here with such inspirational speakers and stories and people who are so passionate about what they do, and it shows. You feel it tangibly. Look, sports have been around for over 15,000 years. Historically, there's evidence that it goes all the way back to the Upper Paleolithic time. Sports is going to continue to be around for a long time. I think what we see is it changes in terms of how it manifests in each generation in each area. So I'm not too worried about sports disappearing. I think we will adapt and we will see where it takes us. Whoever would have thought that we'd be doing sports online as much as we're doing it right now? I mean, it's mind-boggling to me. So I just wanted to give a nod to everybody who's spoken. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I think there are multiple layers to what we heard, and that certainly applies to persons with disabilities. I am not somebody who is specialized in sports. I'm a speech-language pathologist by training. So I have a different lens when I look at sports. To me, sports is a platform, it's a tool, it's a Trojan horse, if you will, for other really serious topics to be discussed and to be put out there for consideration. I heard this throughout all of our speakers' speeches today, everything from the potential to discuss really serious issues, bring multilateralism to the table at very high levels, talk about violence, talk about health issues, talk about partnerships and business opportunities, etc. So there's all these layers that are very important, and specifically giving a voice to marginalized groups who don't have voices, whether it's persons with disabilities, orphans, people who live in refugee camps or areas that are troubled. I think we've heard today the power of sports, and I think it's very important to keep that in mind. As you said, I am very honored to be part of the Special Olympics Saudi Arabia and leading that initiative here. And I think it's a very humbling experience. In March 2019, we attended the World Games in Abu Dhabi. And I'm going to share a very brief story with you because I think it sort of summarizes the whole thing. One of our team members was in the lobby. And just to set the stage a little bit, this was the first time Saudi Arabia had taken female athletes to the games. So we had 21 female athletes, 29 male athletes. We participated in 9 various sports, which is part of the diversity of Special Olympics. It allows the opportunity to participate in over 40 sports. We were there, and there was a lot of focus on us taking a female delegation. What I'm very proud of is, yes, it was historical. Yes, it was the first time we took females, but we took a whole community with us. We had people online supporting us from back home. We had families there of the athletes. We had volunteers. We had medical personnel as volunteers. But the striking story was one of our team members was in the lobby and she was approached by a woman from Germany. And at the time, March 19th, there was a lot going on for the country, especially on the international scene, not all very pleasant. And she literally, the woman said, "Can I stop you? Are you with the Saudi team?" And our team member said, "Yes," very proudly, very happily, "I'm with the Saudi team." And she immediately, literally laid into her. She's like, "You know what? I was going to go to the organizers and write a letter and contest why are you here and complain, and with everything going on and your stance on women, I really was upset that you were here." She said, "But," and that "but" is very important. She said, "But I saw you, and I saw you together, and I saw how you supported each other and how the boys were supporting the girls and the girls were out there supporting the boys, and your families were there, and you love each other. I feel the love." And she said, "Can I get a visa to come visit?" And to me, that is sports diplomacy in a nutshell. It just, I mean, it makes me want to cry every time I tell that story, because literally we didn't even try. It was just, she observed, she saw, and just by being yourselves, sports provided an opportunity. So one of the things we need to keep in mind is sports provides an opportunity in such a short period of time, in one game, in one event, in one interaction. All the ranges of being what makes us human happens. We have unified goals, we have expectations, we have hopes, we have dreams. They can be shattered. You can walk out crying, you can walk out joyous. It really summarizes what it means to be human. And for me, there's nothing more powerful than that. You can spend, in my career, I've spent a lot of energy and time through educational platforms, through employment platforms, trying to develop all of these structures to include persons with disabilities. It takes a lot of time and effort. I have never in my 30 years of work seen what 1 week can do to change individuals and give them a voice. So if Mr. Kemp will allow me to add one more layer. He talked about family, community, and culture. I just want to add the power of the individual, empowering the individual, people who never had a voice, who come in and don't say much, and by the end of a game are standing proudly as an inspiration for a whole nation. People who may be shy and don't want to talk, but yet now they're going out and giving interviews and hugs and sharing their stories. So I think that layer is extremely important. And I think we need to think about this as the 1,000-mile journey. Every life that's touched by sports, every opportunity that's out there, it changes you in a fundamental way that I have not seen anything else be able to do. So it is a privilege and an honor to sit with people who are passionate about this. No matter how fancy or simple we are when we play, the most important thing is we play. And I would like to just end my comments with the Special Olympics oath. I go back and forth, lots of stories, but I think it also summarizes it. The oath goes, "Let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt." And I think each and every person who contributes to this is brave. And I think it's our journey in learning how to be brave together that brings us together. And it's that human spirit. That idea of being brave doesn't mean winning, but it means, actually going out there, trying, putting yourself out there, taking risks that will make us stronger as a whole. So thank you so much, each and every one of you, for everything that you do. Thank you for giving voices to people who don't have the opportunity to have the voice. And I can tell you from where I sit, it means the world to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi. I think that was a perfect way to end this, because this gets to the point of why we're here today. It's not about particularly showcasing one government or one organization or one activity. The point was to show these different careers, these different lives that each of our speakers have, that they've engaged with sports, not for the sake of getting up on television and being seen for millions as a showcase of their talents, but rather each of these people has explored their passion, their love of what they do in creative ways, in ways that people entering the field of Middle East studies or people entering government service or engaging with the Arab world might not normally think of. These types of careers, these types of activities are not the normal career paths that people tend to take. And that these opportunities, whether it's being able to do a cultural exchange, to come as a team to America and see your counterparts working on what you work on, or the chance to open up electronic sports for a whole generation whose parents, whose relatives might not approve of this type of activity, or making opportunities available for special needs individuals in a society where that was unthinkable even 10 years ago. Or for instance, in Kemp's example, creating an organization from scratch entirely from private sector donations to bring a sport to a country that hasn't had that sport in over 100 years. These are aspects of the region, aspects of the Arab world that we don't usually think about, don't usually contemplate. And the opportunity today was to try and shed some light on those activities and open up those opportunities for others. I see that Dr. Anthony is on board with us again. I'd like to close it out by turning to him for any concluding remarks. Thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure to have you. Dr. Anthony?
Thank you, Josh. Again, it's a privilege and a pleasure and an honor to be co-chairing this and co-sponsoring this event with the King Faisal Foundation for Islamic Studies and Research. I'd like to make 3 brief points here. I didn't mention at the beginning that I was a former athlete and playing 4 different sports: baseball, basketball, football, and track, and lettering in all 4. And indeed, I wasn't just in love with those sports. I wasn't just obsessed with them. In a way, I was addicted to them. So here's the point, that there would be those, my Syrian colleague may be an echo of this, that we loved it so much, we dreamed so much, we were so fulfilled and inspired by this, and felt a calling that was as much psychological and physical and moral as it was also social. But in my case, and others I've watched as well, we did so at the expense of our education. So when I finished secondary school, I had 9 scholarship offers for universities to play 1 or more sports for their teams, provided contingent upon my being accepted academically. It turned out that my grades, my education had been so neglected that I could not be accepted in any of the 9. So I went into the army. I became a soldier. And only after I came out did I work at nighttime after working in the daytime to get my education. The point being that had the education part been linked to the athletic part all along, the two would have fed the other, enriched the other, benefited the other. And so I mentioned this. Secondly, 1 or more of our speakers has talked about the joy of winning and training to win. I'm all for that, but I've moved away from winning because winning is almost synonymous with being successful. And the opposite of success is failure. I think there's something else here that's a value that's just as important, if not more so. And I think it is to be effective. Now, being effective doesn't conjure up the notions of successful or failure, but being effective, all of us can be, the more so, and to be other oriented as much as we are striving to achieve our own goals here. And being other oriented and being effective, all of us can be that. So the goal is to participate and do one's best and achieve what is possible, and not score or gauge or judge ourselves on whether we won or we failed. There were times where, yes, indeed, I lost or I let my team down. And I remember going into the locker room and crying my heart out and blaming myself. Now, if I'd had a different perspective there in terms of just playing and participating and effective, I would have been as joyous as the rest of us, whether we lost or we won. And lastly, on the support aspect, one of our speakers, great because baseball, who's from Richmond, Virginia, where coincidentally I'm also from, grew up there. Both of us did. That's where we played and learned this particular game. What happens if you lose the private sector support? It's a given from a Department of State representative spokesperson that there's official support, governmental support, there are fiscal monetary policies that help to support this. If one loses the private sector support, one risks at the optical level of being an agent of a government, of being part of a government set of policies, internationally, foreign relations towards another country where the games are being played. I would put greater emphasis on the effort to find private sector supporters, almost exclusively, if possible. And if not exclusively, then partially. And if not partially, certainly then minimally. These are my 3 points, and it's been a joy to listen to everyone. I've learned an enormous amount, and I'm the better off. I'm the net beneficiary for this event, and it's because each of you participated. You were effective. And you didn't win, you didn't lose, you were effective, and we're all in your debt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done, and I think that the King Faisal Center will have closed this out from the website now. I just want to thank everyone for coming. You can all exit now if you please, whenever you're ready. And we'll send you all thank yous later, because we really appreciate everything you were able to do for us today. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to close out now.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Josh. Appreciate
Josh.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Josh.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everybody.
Thank you.